Hello and welcome back to the Little Craft House. Today I'm going to take you on a little polymer clay journey. What started off as one project led to quite a few different projects, so I thought I would still just include them all in today's tutorial, and I'll also be showing you what I made with some of the scraps. So before I start it, I'm going to say that I think that this might be my most favourite design to date. It's actually something that's been kind of floating around in my head for a while, and yeah, I was able to achieve that look with today's design. So I know that a lot of you who watch my tutorials are just beginners and just starting out in the polymer clay world. So if that is you, don't stress about this design being too complicated. It's really not. It's actually, I think, to be really super achievable. It's also really adaptable as well. So if you're going to skip a couple of steps, it should still turn out just as good. It just might be a more simpler version. Okay, so let's get on with the actual making part of this tutorial. So if you've seen my tutorials before, you know that I always like to start them with the conditioning process of my polymer clays. So I've gone ahead and chosen a whole bunch of colours. I'm wanting them to be nice bright colours. We're going to use a black background, so I really want these colours to have a nice pop. And so I've cut out a chunk of each of these and I'm just starting to get them conditioned, which means that they're making them workable and soft enough for me to be able to use. So all of these colours, with the exception of that purple, which I'm pretty sure was just a mix of scrap colours, but all the other colours have all come from packets, and I like to use the Sculpey Primo and Sculpey Souffle ranges. They're all really good brands of clays. They're pretty much packet ready, so you don't have to work them too much to get them conditioned, but they're also not too soft and squishy or oily. So once I was happy with the conditioning process, so they're nice and conditioned, I'm now just forming them into a little I suppose tube shape. So I'm gonna just do this by folding and squeezing and just rolling them around between my fingers. I want to make sure that I get out all of the air that's within it. So as I'm folding, I don't want to trap any air. If we do trap air, it just means that it'll create the air bubbles, which later on could become holes in our design. So we don't want that. We want to squish out those bubbles just to make sure that it's all nice, one solid piece. Now, during this process as well, do not worry if you're just being rough. It does not have to be perfect. The whole design is going to be all squished down afterwards anyway, so you just don't need to take that time to make it all perfect. Now, because we are actually going to be rolling them down, I've realised that I've probably made these all a little bit too tall. So in a moment, I'm just going to chop them down to make them a little bit more smaller. If I left them how they are at the moment, when I roll them out, each colour's going to squish out too much, and I actually wanted the colours to be quite nice and tight together, so that when I cut a pair of earrings out, they'll have lots of colour within them. So I'm just cut them in half, and then I'm just going to reorganise the colours here. I don't want the same colours touching, obviously, so I'm just kind of spreading them out and just making them in a bit of a random colour pattern. And then once I'm happy with that, just going to give it a quick little roll just to bond each of those colours together. Right, so the next step we're going to do is going to give us the really nice crackle effect on top. So this is foil. It's like an imitation gold leaf foil, but it's not gold, it's black. So it's a very thin, fragile sheet of foil. So I have been known to get in quite a bit of a mess with this. So my biggest tip is to make sure that all your tools, your hands, your work surfaces are all dry. Don't use the foil after just wiping everything down, or you'll find that it will stick to anything that is wet or damp. Because the surface of the clay is tacky, it's going to stick to the clay without the need for any adhesives. Now, be really careful as you are separating it from the backing sheet here. As you'll see there, I've just ripped it, but again, don't worry, doesn't have to be perfect because we are going to roll it in a minute and give it the crackle effect. So if there happens to be a few cracks in the foil here, it's not actually going to matter. Now, I like to put any scraps to the side because quite often I'll just use small amounts of foil. So all these little bits that are hanging over the edge, they can definitely be used later, so no wastage. And just to make sure that the foil is all stuck down nicely to the clay, just going to rub my finger over it just really gently, and just make sure that all those edge bits are all pushed down as well. Okay, so this is what it looks like at the moment. Nothing particularly special, but those things are about to change because we're now going to crackle the foil. Right, so with the acrylic roller, I am just going to start rolling over it really slowly and really gently. And you can see that as I am stretching out the clay, that foil is crackling. And I'm just going to release it from the tile a couple of times during this process, just to make sure that I don't bond it to the tile too much, because I do want to be able to actually lift it up afterwards. All right, just zoom in there a little bit so you can see it better. You can see how all those colours are now starting to peek through that black foil. And we want to roll the clay down to being about 3 millimeters in thickness. That's the thickness that I like to use for my earrings. So I'm planning on cutting, well, I was planning on cutting a couple of pairs of earrings out of this, but the clay actually spread out a little bit more than what I was hoping, so it wasn't as colourful for each piece as what I was hoping. So that's when I then moved on to the next project. But anyway, so this is how it's looking at about that 3 millimeter thickness. So it does look really pretty. The foil's not lifting at all. So it is nice and secured on because we've now rolled it in as well. So we don't need to worry about the foil coming off now in any stage because it is well stuck. So I've just grabbed my little wavy cutter and I'm just going to try and position it to grab as many colours as it can. And of course, the hard bit with this one was actually trying to work out how to make a pair without it looking too different. So obviously I didn't get any of the hot pink in that first piece, so I didn't want to get too much hot pink in the second piece. Right, so these scraps that are left from cutting that one pair is what we actually want to be using. So they are going to form our next project. We're going to just release these ones from the tile and I shall pop them aside to bake up, and then I can make them into earrings later. So I could have cut more pieces if I wanted, but I decided just to go with that one pair of earrings. And then with our lovely scraps here, I'm just going to feed it through my pasta machine. So I'm just going to push the pieces together just to make it a more solid piece, rather than putting it through with that gap, because that would just be messy. So just pushing it together, and it doesn't matter if the pieces overlap or go a little bit more random here. So I'll just release that from the tile, and then there we go. So I've made sure that the machine is on the thinnest setting, and then we're just going to pass the clay through. And as you can see, it's just stretching out those colours more and making the foil be more spacious along those colours as well. So it's nicely spaced out. So we now have a huge piece of clay to work with for our next project. So I think what I'm going to do is just cut this piece in half. It'll just make it a little bit more workable, and I can always grab some more afterwards if I need, or grab back the other half for more clay afterwards if I need it. So with my long blade, I'm just going to start slicing some pieces. So our design that we're going to be doing is going to be a bit of a, I suppose it's a little bit like mosaics. We're going to tile down these colours. So I want them all to obviously not be the same, but I do want them to have straight edges so that they can kind of sit next to each other nicely. So I'm just going to cut a bunch. Now I did realise that I don't have any of the green, or only a tiny bit of the green in this half that I chose to work with. So I'll cut some green afterwards. And the thing that I do like about this as well is because we've joined those colours together and then fed it through the machine to squish it, some of the colours have blended a little bit. So it's not necessarily just the yellow to pink. There's a slight little bit of orange in there. I don't know if you can quite see it here, but there is some little bits of gradient that happen. So I do like how that is working. So nice straight edges on all of these pieces. So I'm just going to separate some of them because they're just kind of stuck together a little bit. It'll make it easier in the next section. I've just grabbed my scalpel knife here too, just to help cut some of the pieces a little bit smaller as well. I mentioned earlier that we were going to be working with a black base for our design. So this one is Soufflé Poppy Seed, and I really like Poppy Seed because of its texture. So it's a little bit more of a matte finish, the Soufflé range is. And yeah, so it's not quite as shiny as if I would have used the Primo Black. So yeah, it's a little bit more of a matte finish and has that little bit of texture to it as well. So again, I'm just going to condition this, and I'm probably going to need to cut a little bit more because I don't think I'm going to have enough clay here for my base. But yeah, just going to condition it up, and then I'm just going to pop it through the pasta machine to make it thinner as well, because we're going to be layering. We don't want it to be too thick. So I did add some more clay to it here, and I'm just going to pop it through a couple of times. And this is on about a number 2 or 3 setting. I didn't want it to obviously be the thinnest setting because that would be too thin, but I didn't want it to be my normal 3mm because then it would get too thick. So I actually ended up adding even more clay to it because I looked at how many pieces I had cut ready to tile down, and I was like, I don't have enough. So I added some more black so that I've got a nice big sheet to work with. Now, slowly, piece by piece, I am going to start putting these colours down. So as I start tiling these colours, I just want to make sure that I've got a good range of colours. I'm going to try not to put 2 of the same colour next to each other. Might be a little bit hard because some of these pieces do have multiple colours on them. But I also want to make sure that I'm leaving that little bit of black gap between, because that's what's going to really make those colours stand out. Afterwards, I'm also going to need to roll the clay down just slightly to flatten it onto the base. I think I might leave it very slightly 3D. So I'm not going to roll it super flat. If you were to roll it super flat, you'd need to make sure that your gaps were bigger because again, when you roll the clay down, it's going to stretch and it would close up any of those gaps. But I think I'm just going to do a slight roll, just enough to adhere the clay on and not stretch it out too much. So whilst I'm putting these pieces on, I'm not pressing them down too much. I'm really just kind of pushing them to position them, but they're not solidly stuck, because if I do need to change anything, I don't want to risk tearing the base or messing it up. So I'm pretty much just sitting them on lightly just so that it gives me the opportunity to move them later if I do need to. Okay, so I am whacking this into time lapse now because once again, this took me a really long time. So you did not want to sit here and watch it in real time. But yes, just enjoy this little time lapse of me tiling the pieces. And just as a side note, I was going to put some music here so that you could listen to some music whilst I worked away, but I couldn't work out how to do it because the app has obviously changed how it used to insert the music. So hopefully by next time I need music, I can work out how to do it. So I absolutely love how this is turning out. Just those colours really are popping nicely against the black, and it just looks so good. So I'm so glad it has turned out the way that it has. Now, I always struggle to work out what I'm going to do with a design once I really, really like it, because I don't obviously want to wreck it by cutting it up. So I did decide that I will cut some earrings out of it, but I also had another idea as well. So before I get on with that, I do just need to set these in place. So I've put down the baking paper and I'm just giving a quick little roll over the top. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm not going to put too much pressure on because I don't want each of those colours to spread out too much. I just want to be able to bond it to the clay without it falling off. Now, I kind of probably needed a bigger blade for this, and I probably should have released it before I went and did the rolling, because it's now gotten quite stuck to my tile. So you can watch me struggle there for a moment. There we go, we've got it up without any damage, so that is all good. Right, so as I was just mentioning, a few different projects. Now you can see I've got a new craft knife here. So because I love this design so much, I decided that I'm going to cover my knife in this design, and then that way I'll be able to be looking at it and using it and working with it every day. So I have done this before with my knives. You'll probably notice in my other tutorials that my knives are always covered in some clay. So yeah, this is the perfect design to do it today. So I'm just trimming the edges to make sure that they are nice and straight. And I want to make sure that I leave a bit of the silver down near that blade free, because that's the bit where you twist to tighten and loosen the blade up. So I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to work out how much clay I need to be able to roll it in. So I'm just going to roll it over. I'm just fiddling around a little bit here actually. I'm just trying to make sure I'm going to do it the best way possible. And I also don't really want any air bubbles trapped underneath. So I'm just making sure that it's sealed on nicely, and then I'm just rolling it up. And I'm just trying to put a little dent in that base clay there, just so that I know where to cut, so that I don't have to trim it down too much. Right, there we go. Pretty much meets up nicely. So I'm just going to close that gap, just pressing it down just to make sure that it is nicely closed in that part. And I've tried to make sure that that seam is on the underneath piece, so it's not at the side or on the top where I'm looking at. It's on that under part. Right, and the rest of the clay is still good to put to the side and use for another project. But here we go with my knife. So I'm just going to give it a little roll just to secure it onto the knife. And that seam closed up. Giving it a little test. It's quite, it's not too thick. It's actually really good thickness to hold. Maybe because I am used to working with a covered knife. I was finding it being silver was just too thin anyway. So this gives it a nice, I suppose, ergonomic handle. Is that what it's called? I think it is. Right, so I'm just examining it to make sure that it's all okay. I did manage to transfer a little bit of white clay there somehow. I don't think I actually noticed that. Right, I'm trimming down here to make sure that that edge is nice and straight. And yeah, unfortunately I do have to leave that base bit clear, because that's what I need to adjust to replace that knife blade. And I'm just smoothing that off. And then the end there, I'll just kind of squeeze that to make it close up and encase it nicely. And then I'm just going to move on to doing some earrings. So I decided to use a nice big hexagon. I don't use this one very often, so I thought, why not? It's kind of that geometric shape, like nice straight edges as well, so it kind of matches the patterns of the design. So we're just going to cut out a couple of pieces of these ones. Just trying to make sure that my colours are even within each of these shapes as well, because you need them to look like they are a matching pair. even though they're still quite different, they still need to coordinate. So I've also got my long rectangle here. This one's really good to use along the edges because being quite thin, it doesn't take up too much of the design. And I've also got a circle. So just cut a few pieces of these ones as well. So I'm just going to get all my pieces done first and then I'll pop them all into the oven together to bake. Now, something I do get asked about with the knife is the baking of that. Well, because that knife is completely metal, there's no plastic or rubber in that knife, it's completely fine to go into the oven. So because our polymer clay bakes at quite a low temperature, it's not going to affect the metal at all. I've done it many times before and I've not had any issues. So yeah, the knife is completely fine to bake. When it comes to baking times and temperatures, always check your packets of your clays. So because I'm using the Sculpey Primo and Sculpey Soufflé, I'm going to bake at 130 degrees and I like to normally bake between 45 minutes to an hour. So you can always bake for longer, but just not hotter, because hotter will burn your clay, whereas longer, it just continues to bake and yeah, it won't burn. So I've got as many pieces out of that design as I could. So I've just gently lifted that skeleton piece off. That little one got caught. But we're going to use those scraps for something in a minute. So I'm just going to, oh, look, I think I can get another circle out of it. So I'll get another circle. But yes, I'm going to use it in a minute. Doesn't matter if it had broken up a little bit, but I've just got it as one piece at the moment because it's more satisfying to pull it off all in one piece. Right, just getting those last couple of circles out. And we'll just pop that to the side. And just once again, going to use my flexi blade just to release these off of the tile. It's always a good idea to just kind of run your fingers around the edges of the pieces before baking, because it'll just help to smooth it out and therefore be less to clean up later. I'm not really doing it on these, but I usually do. I don't know why I didn't with these ones. But anyway, yes, just lifting them up. I'm just putting them all onto the baking tray. Right, so as promised, the scraps. So there's not an awful lot here that I could cut out into pieces. So what I'm going to do is just start stacking and layering onto itself. So I'm actually just pulling it apart. So even if I hadn't pulled it off all in one piece, it wouldn't matter because I'm able to pull it off and stack them up here. I'm trying to keep it all so that the colour is all facing upwards. There are a few little scrap bits of black that I'm adding in as well, and I'm also adding some of those tile pieces that I cut that didn't get used. This way they're not going to waste, because I can't really use them for anything else because they're multicoloured and they have that speckle on them as well. If I had some other scrap bits of clay on my bench, I'd probably add that in as well because it's just colourful, so it's nice to just add in whatever I've got. I'm just going to chuck those little bits on top there. We don't want to waste clay, so we'll just get as much used this way as we can. And then once it's all nicely stacked, we're just going to squeeze it together, get it to all combine all together as one piece. There was some more scrappy bits there. If you've got an acrylic plate, you can use that to apply even pressure on each side. But this time I'm just using my hands, giving a squeeze just to try and again, squeeze out air bubbles, and I'm just making it into a rectangular shape. I definitely find that the rectangles or more squared shapes with the edges, it's easier to slice and tile them rather than if you just did it as a round cylinder. So here we go. So just slicing some pieces. I'm just slicing on the long ways and then the end because I want to just work out which way the pattern looks best. I think it's definitely going to be long ways. And I'm going to just try and slice each of these slices at about that 3mm thickness so that I'm not rolling and stretching it down too much. So this looks really good. I do this all the time with my scraps. I really like the way that it comes out, the pattern comes out with it. So just a simple tile here and rolling it together. And then that's just going to create another little design that I can cut some pieces out of. So I will actually just pop this to the side and cut some pieces later. Well, it actually looks like there's kind of a bit of a face happening there, the top and center. But there we go. So that's a great way to use up your scraps. Right, so all those pieces in the oven and get them all baked up. Okay, so I have let the pieces cool down, which also helps to firm them up, and I've decided on some designs of how I'm going to put them together. So again, this wasn't in my original plan. I wasn't going to assemble them in this way, but I decided that I'm going to make them just some maxi earrings. Why not just go full hog, make some big ones? So I'm just going to drill the holes in those now. I've just laid them out in the way that I would like them to hang. So it's just giving me an idea of where I need to put those holes. And I'm just making sure that I'm drilling through full pieces of colour as well. It gets a little bit tricky when if you're drilling between colours just because of the uneven height difference because they are that little bit of 3D. Now those vibrations are just sending them everywhere anyway, so I try my best to remember which way I had them. So obviously I like to drill my holes once baked. You can obviously do them whilst the clay is raw, but I do prefer to do it once baked because I find sometimes if you're adding holes whilst raw, it can distort your shapes a little bit. So I just wait until it's baked up and cooled down, and then I use my drill. So the drill that I have is a Dremel handheld drill. I go into a lot of detail about my drill on my frequently asked questions video. Hopefully I remember to link that. I'll put it into the description box if I remember. If I forget, please leave me a comment telling me to add it in. And in that tutorial, I talk about my drill and my oven and some of the other things that I use as well. So yeah, that's those ones done. I'll do the next one here as well. Again, I decided to change things up a little bit with this one. A little bit like an exclamation mark, but I'm doing one up one way and the other way. Yeah, I just thought for something different. Rather than just keeping with the same sort of shapes and styles, I just thought I would go different with this one. So that's what I'm going to trial. Okay, so they are all done. I'm now going to start assembling them. I've just got to remember how I had them positioned before, especially those trio ones. I'm going to use these jump rings today. These ones are some coloured jump rings that I have. They are a 10mm jump ring, so a little bit larger than what I normally like to use, but I'm loving the fact that they are nice colours, and these designs are all about the colour, so definitely going to use these with colour. I just need to make sure that I've got enough of each colour to be able to use. As normal, I changed my mind on the colours that I was going to use. I've decided to go with the purple for the trio earrings and the blue for the doubles. Now, whilst assembling, I like to use 2 pairs of pliers, either the round nose or the long flat nose ones. It doesn't really matter. I've grabbed 2 pairs of the long flat nose today. Oh, but quickly before I start assembling, I'll just show you the knife. So this is how it's turned out. I absolutely love it. It's definitely more fun using pretty tools. Anyway, I'm just going to use the knife here just to smooth out the edges on these pieces. Now, you can sand if you want to. I'm being lazy today, so I'm just going to use the knife just to smooth out those edges where it needs to. And then I can get back to my assembling. So back to the 2 pairs of pliers. Remember, when we open jump rings, we need to twist open like so, and then that way we're not distorting the circularness of those jump rings. So I'm going to thread those pieces on and then just twist it closed, and it should meet up exactly how it did before, so there's no gap left. There we go. So I'll just do the rest of them, get them all assembled up. Again, I've just popped this into fast speed just so you're not watching the whole process take too long. Now, the bit that I didn't film, I forgot to film it, but I forgot to film putting the backings onto these earrings as well. So what I normally do is I normally assemble and then flip them over and then glue the backings on. So I use E6000 adhesive. That's a strong super glue, and I find that it works well with the polymer clay and the metal findings. Findings wise, I use 304 stainless steel earring posts. I know that some people don't have success with E6000, but I've never had an issue, and some of my pairs that I made from years ago are still going strong. So when it comes to adhesives, just test them out yourself and just see which ones do work best for you. And once you find one that you like, definitely make sure that you stick with it. Okay, and so there we have it. There is my 2 pairs of earrings. Those ones are done, and also my craft knife. You'll definitely be seeing that craft knife make some appearances in my future tutorials. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have enjoyed watching this and going through the process of my multiple projects to get to this final project. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I shall see you again next week for another tutorial. See you then. Bye.